Hey guys, welcome back to NG Education YouTube channel. In today's video, we're talking about how to get into Oxford for either French or German. And today we have a very special guest, Tuppy. Tuppy, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Sally, for having me.
Tuppy read French and German for his undergraduate at, were you at Christchurch?
I was at Christchurch, yeah.
Yeah, at Christchurch, Oxford. And Tuppy is a postgraduate student now, also at Oxford. And Tuppy, it's great to have you with us, and we hope to learn all your tricks and tips how to get in.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Great. Well, listen, first of all, do you need, lots of people are put off from applying for a languages course, like French, German, or any other language at a competitive university like Oxford, because they didn't study that language at school, either because it wasn't offered, or maybe it was offered and, for whatever reason, it just didn't work. Can you still make an application without having studied those languages?
So the only languages you have to have studied before at Oxford are French and Spanish. So if you haven't done those at school, you can't apply. But I think most people will have had the opportunity to study those. But otherwise, it's very common to do a beginner's course. They call it ab initio in a sort of pretentious Latin way. But I had someone in my college who studied French and beginner's German, whilst I did French and experienced A-level German I'd done already. So that's not an issue at all.
So specifically, if you did want to apply to French and German, you were expected to have an A-level in French or equivalent. So you couldn't apply without it.
Couldn't apply without the A-level in French. Could without German. Of course, if your school has offered the language and you haven't done it, you have to justify why. But actually, in my case, I started out doing French and beginner's Russian at Oxford, but I found I wasn't enjoying the Russian course, so I switched to German. But my school had offered Russian, but I had not taken it up. So, but in my interview, I said, well, I was 13 at the time that I had to choose my languages. I had no idea that I'd end up being interested in Russian literature, so I chose German, and they're fine with that. If you show a genuine enthusiasm for your subject, then it's okay if you haven't done it at school when it was available.
Yeah, and also, look, I mean, they're human beings, right? They know that when you're 13, you make a decision that may have implications later on, and you shouldn't really be kind of held by the consequences of that decision. So,
Exactly.
No, that's interesting. And would you say, so we've had, in NJ, we've had a couple of students who weren't offered languages at school, but they basically just self-taught themselves. So Duolingo, lots of reading, we had a student, she switched her phone to the language she was studying, was watching YouTube, films with subtitles, and, she somehow managed to get in, right? So it's not, it's not, in fact, I would say in her case, it almost seemed more impressive, the fact that
Definitely. I'm impressed. No, the tutors would love that. I think a lot of people, they're perhaps going through the motions of it. They like studying French and German or whatever, but they're not really passionate about it. But if you're someone who's switched your phone to French, or you're constantly reading novels by Flaubert, for example, then I think an Oxford academic who's dedicated 30 years of his or her life to reading French literature is probably going to get on well with you and feel they can sympathize with you.
Yeah. No, exactly. All right, and just go through the mechanics of the application. So, when is your application deadline? What do you submit, and what are the components of the application?
So you'll apply sort of the Christmas before your before you would join. So in the sort of the autumn term, I think it's around October, November will be the personal statement deadline. I'm a bit rusty on the details. But...
Yeah, so it's normally 15th of October of the year before you're hoping to join. So if you want to join Oxford in September 2023, you need to apply by 15th of October 2022.
Okay. And that will involve your personal statement, and then also for modern languages, submitting 2 essays. So one in the language that you're applying for. So say you're doing French and German, you can just choose, okay, I'll write an essay in French, and then the other essay is in English about a topic of French literature. So like I said before about Flaubert, you could write an essay about Madame Bovary, for example. So those are the two key components. And then once you've submitted your personal statement and the essays, also will process that, and then you'll be invited to a modern languages aptitude test is the next step. So if you've studied the language before, then you'll take a standardized test. So that'll be quite a difficult grammar test. So I did that for French, whereas for beginners Russian, I had to do their ab initio test, which involves them making up a language, giving you the basic rules, and then you have to work out how the language works and answer, translate sentences in this gobbledygook language, which is really interesting and fun, quite daunting. They're time pressured tests, these, which is fine when you know the language, but when you have half an hour to work out how a language works and answer all these questions, it can be a bit scary. But I think if you have an aptitude for languages, you'll do well on that bit.
Tuppy, I mean, if I'm honest with you, it sounds a bit OTT, over the top, just to find a couple of 18-year-olds to do an undergraduate degree. Why did they have to make up this this new language for the MLAT?
Well, I think if you're, say, going to be taking beginners Russian at Oxford, you're going to meet new grammar rules, new vocab. So they want to see, okay, if I get this student and I'm trying to teach him how the present tense works in Russian, will he pick that up quickly? So if he or she sees this made up language and I give him the present tense in whatever they call it, some gobbledygook, and he understands it, then okay, he'll probably be able to do the Russian present tense. So I think it's actually, even if it seems a bit over the top, it's actually quite a clever way of working out if you've got that aptitude.
That's interesting, and I'm guessing that component of the MLAT is the same for all languages applicants. So whether you're applying for French, German, Russian, or I don't know, Japanese, whatever. So
yeah. So if you've done the language before, you'll take the normal test. If you're a beginners, then whether it's Chinese or Russian or Arabic, you'll take the ab initio test.
It's almost an equalizer, right? So if every applicant who hasn't studied the language before is assessed equally, right? So they're all in the same boat, and you can't basically, you're at no advantage or disadvantage compared to others because you're all forced to do a test on this.
Exactly, which is important because the college that you're accepted into only has a certain number of slots for all modern languages. They don't have, say, 5 French specifically, 3 German. It'll be, okay, we're going to take the best modern linguists according to which tutors we have in the college, for example. But that means it's important for them to level out the playing field between the different languages, definitely.
Yeah. And Tuppy, certain subjects at Oxford, at least when I was an undergraduate, had a reputation. Classics is the obvious one for having a reputation for public school, privately educated students dominate that that area. And with languages, not many, but not all state schools offer good teaching of languages, right? So would you say, what would you say to an applicant maybe who doesn't, who's at a school, maybe perhaps they have a language offered, but it's not that great. There aren't many students who even think of applying to Oxbridge for languages. What would your advice be specifically to them?
I'd say I wouldn't worry too much about that. I think Oxford's very good at looking for your potential. In Christchurch, we had quite an even split between privately and state educated students within the modern languages cohort, perhaps slightly more weighted towards privately educated, but the ones who've been state school ended up doing really well. It's true that perhaps at first their grammar was a bit weaker because they hadn't had the same level of teaching, but the tutors definitely understood that. And I would say they had more of a spark on the literature side of things, perhaps. And I think that's what the tutors had singled out at interview, that they saw things in a different way. Perhaps they had, maybe because they hadn't been taught in such a sort of uniform way as you would get at a top private school. They'd often done it on their own, shown that enthusiasm outside the classrooms, and that shone through, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. And my experience, often the schools, not all, but many schools kind of mess it up, right? And the way of teaching, delivering A levels or IB or whatever your country's qualification is actually quite different to how Oxford or Cambridge, will teach. And often, kind of having an unspoiled applicant who doesn't yet have the bad habits or the certain kind of ways of thinking can be quite helpful, because they can take the material and then kind of mold you and shape you
Definitely.
in whatever they need.
Yeah, you have to relearn quite a few things when you arrive.
By the way, those of you who are watching, you may or may not know, NJ has an access scheme. So if you're a UK citizen or resident and you are eligible for free school meals, drop us an email on hello@njeducation.co.uk. And every year, unfortunately, we can't help everybody, but last year we helped about a dozen applicants with applications to UK and America free of charge. Do reach out, and we will potentially help you as well. Tuppy, another question. Once you're at Oxford, all modern languages have a year abroad, right?
Mm-hmm.
So where did you go for your year abroad?
So I spent the majority of it just outside Paris, about an hour away, in a small town called Jouy-en-Josas, which has HEC Paris, a big business school. And I worked in their communications department for around 6 months, from September to February. And then the latter half I spent in a few places in Germany. I went to Munich for a language course. I did some farming near Berlin, and I worked at a hotel just outside Dresden in the sort of Eastern German countryside. So it's quite a varied experience. And you spend a minimum of 6 months. I think that would be very rare to only spend that long, but between 6 and 12 months usually.
And I guess in your case, it was sort of 6 months in each country, because you're pursuing two languages. But if you just did German, you would spend a year in a German-speaking country.
Exactly, yeah.
It's fascinating that most applicants who go on a year abroad, they go and they study at a university. But you actually, you had a job, and so you were earning and just kind of living a normal life.
Yeah. So I had a monthly salary from HEC, and they provided my accommodation because it's a university. I was staying in amongst all the students, so that was very nice. I think a lot of people from Oxford do an internship. I think studying can be a good option, but for some people, they don't really get that involved because they're not taking an exam really at the end of the year, or if they are taking an exam, it doesn't count towards their Oxford degree. So perhaps they don't get as stuck in. Whereas if you're working in a French company or a German company, then by nature you have to get involved. And I found that very rewarding, working with natives and constantly speaking French with them.
Would you say that was it useful in terms of your language ability, or?
Yeah, definitely. There was a big improvement. I think it's very much what you make of it, everyone always says, because particularly in somewhere, I was near Paris, so in somewhere like Paris, or if you go to Berlin for German, you can find English speaking people quite easily. So you could have a fun time but not really improve. Whereas if you push yourself, it can be hard to constantly be speaking in another language. It's very tiring, and it can be a bit embarrassing when it goes wrong, but it's also much more rewarding. So I think it definitely helps a lot. Massively.
Do you still stay in touch with anyone you met on your year abroad?
Yeah, a couple of people from HEC, my boss there, and another intern who worked there. And then also there were, I did speak to some English people whilst I was there. There was a big cohort of UK interns, actually, all in different departments. So I'm in touch with a couple of them, and one of them is a very good friend of mine still. And then from the German side of things, I keep in touch with a few people, particularly one guy I worked with at the hotel near Dresden. We are in quite regular contact. Yeah.
And so, well, I guess you weren't just learning languages. You also sort of somehow managed to find English speakers and socialize with them too. No, cool. And what do what can you do with the languages degree, right? I mean, apart from being a French and German teacher, I mean, who needs languages anyway, right? It's because you have Google Translate, and surely these days it's becoming less and less relevant.
I think because that attitude is becoming quite common, having a languages degree really sets you apart in that you can be the go-to person when a company needs to send, say a UK company needs to send someone to France or Germany, you're there. Or you can actually obviously go and work in Paris, Munich, that kind of thing. There are obviously jobs in translation or interpreting, which are more traditional ways of using your degree. You'll be using a lot of the same skills that you have acquired at Oxford, or as I said, just working in a traditional company, but just in a different language. So I would say there's a premium on having these skills because everyone is now so reliant on Google Translate or those kind of tools.